2, 1. Hi everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today I've got David Blois, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about what you need as a company to have for someone to be interested in buying your startup. David, where can people find you?
Yes, you can find me at on LinkedIn, David Blois, which my name's on the front there, or look up M&A Advisory on LinkedIn. You'll come through to me that way. Our website's www.mandaadvisory.com. They're probably the obvious places to catch me. I'm sure there's not many David Bloises on LinkedIn. So.
No. So David, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. You do a lot of work in mergers and acquisitions.
Indeed.
You've got a lot of experience of this. So when an organization is looking to make an acquisition, what's the first thing that the buyer looks for when evaluating a business?
Yeah, sure. Just to say there, Tim, is that we don't just work with startups. We work with quite large organisations as well. But most of these points are completely relevant for all sizes of organisation. So that hopefully that will help. But obviously, a buyer's worst fear in the world when they go to buy a business is the founder might leave, and they'll actually be left with something that sort of falls away in their hands. They won't know how to run it, or etc. So that's their biggest fear. So you've got to mirror that somehow. And what I say to my clients is to try and create a sustainable business, i.e. to founders to create a business that will run without you as best you can and will generate income and cash flows without you. So there's a number of things to look at here. Number one is a second tier management team. Try and have a good team that is an understudy for you, and the better quality, the better.
And that's in terms of having the founders, but also having a management team under the founders.
Underneath the founders, yes, and that can be done gradually. You might want to, because when you're a founder, you're often involved in all sorts of things, but gradually you want to try and, as the old saying goes, work on the business rather than in the business. So you want to try and get rid of the sort of easier jobs first of all. So you might think, oh, well, perhaps I can get an interim finance director to run the finance and operations part, and then gradually, perhaps you might get a business development guy who can do the operator CRM, etc. Obviously, the last thing the founder lets go of very often is the new business entirely, talking to new clients, etc., because that's the hardest. But if you can get people to do that as well, that's great. Other aspects of sustainability are to have good finance systems and procedures, everything written down as much as possible so that new employees can come in and they'll pick up the business very quickly. Good margins, good cash flows. The other thing I would say about agencies and a lot of businesses is really think about your marketing, particularly marketing agencies, because there is certainly a cobbler's children syndrome in the agency world. And you might say what got you here might not get you there. And what with modern day algorithms on sort of LinkedIn and other technology, you really need to work hard to make sure your agency is the front, and also it's generating this pipeline of new business, which is going to create your cash flows on the other end. So all of those things are important.
So in terms of my question was going to be one about softer signals. I guess that's about making sure that there's some sort of policies and you're having the regular board meetings and that, because it's just so easy to be so busy that you don't do some of the obvious processes.
Yes, I agree, Tim, and I think that's really important. I think it's if you're, you know, you want to be strategically aligned, you really need to have these sort of regular monthly meetings or even weekly meetings, perhaps a weekly meeting on the day-to-day, and then a monthly meeting on the more strategic stuff. And also it's a really good way of developing that second tier team, because instead of you sitting perhaps with your accountant or something like that, you can invite selected members of your team in and discuss the business with them, and gradually they'll learn and take away an awful lot from that. Like, you know, going through finances, going through new business, going through current projects, all of those sorts of things are really useful for that second tier to learn about the business and see it from an overview rather than just you know, their own silo.
Certainty is critical, isn't it? Nobody likes surprises. So
Yeah.
what does certainty look like from the buyer side?
Well, I think you're looking at those things where they can meet the second tier team, you know, and buy into that second tier team. So when you go to sell your business, you know, you'll obviously have chemistry meetings with potential buyers. And if you've got a really good number two as a founder, you know, you should involve him in the meeting, and they can meet him and they can buy into that founder, you know, so that's good. I mean, I would say that, you know, what we say to our sellers is when they sell a business is that there should be a good chemistry between the parties when they meet for the first time. There should be a cultural match so that you've got a very similar culture. You wouldn't put a bureaucratic business with an entrepreneurial business. And finally, there should be an outstanding business proposition. There should be a real reason for doing the deal. And we always insist that our clients tick those three boxes before we let them loose and get on with the deal. Now, if you're a buyer, and occasionally we work for buyers, most of our work is sellers, but occasionally we work for an international buyer buying into the UK. But we have those things in reverse. You know, we say to the buyer, make sure that you've got those things in place. And I think if you've got those three things, that's really important in making sure that deal will work.
Yeah, I think it's from a cultural perspective, having run your own business, going from the place where you don't have a boss, where you don't have to fill in holiday forms and stuff, to suddenly having a boss and having to fill in holiday forms is quite a cultural shift, isn't it?
Yes, that can be a big shift for sure. Yeah.
So how important is recurring revenue and cash flow?
I think they are pretty important, and there's different ways to measure that. I mean, I would say buyers aren't overly obsessed if you're going to sell your business and you don't have client contracts, but you've got a good track record with working with a buyer, working with a client for some time. That's pretty good. It's all about relationships. If you've got a good relationship with buyers, keep saying buyers, apologies. That if you've got a good relationship with your clients and you work with them year on year, that's good enough for the buyers for sure. And cash flow, I mean, what you should be in terms of the buyer looking at the business, in terms of ratios, and I don't like to talk too much about ratios, but you know, what you should be looking at is about a 20% on revenue profit margin. The three sort of measures I would give to a business are sort of staff costs to revenue around 55% for an agency.
Right.
Could be up to 60, could be as low as 50, but around that level.
So that's the people in the organization will be costing 60% of
that's right. Yeah, I would say around 55, 60 starting to get in the red a little bit, but around 55. And the other thing is about 20% margin. So your operating profit as a percentage of your revenue should be about 20%. So that leaves, if you're running at, you know, 60% staff costs and you've got 20% profit, 20% of your revenue is on other overheads, you might say. But also when it comes to cash flow, you should be aiming to convert as much of that profit into cash. So the 20% margin will give you a decent headroom because buyers don't want a low margin business, because it creates risk for them. That, you know, if you lose a client or something, that business may go into loss. But a good 20% margin is healthy. And of that 20% profit margin, you should be translating about 85% of that profit into cash every year before tax. So that's quite a good measure. So if your bank account has gone up by 85% of your operating profit before, you know, ignoring tax and other things like that, you're doing well. And it's probably quite a useful measure, really and truly.
And I'm guessing in this day of we seem to be into another startup boom with artificial intelligence, and we're seeing people, certainly in San Francisco, buying companies actually probably for the people more than the idea, because of the lack of talent in the market. So people shouldn't. Do you think that people should be bothered about how much money they're making, and therefore think that they're, you know, if we're not making enough money, we can't sell?
No, I mean, it depends the stage of the business. I suppose where what I'm talking about here is an agency, a people business, rather than a technology business. So, and generally, you need those parameters to sell, because that's how businesses are valued, really and truly. Of course, there's a number of intangible things, but buyers will look at roughly what profits are making, and you know, make an offer accordingly. But of course, there are buyers buy businesses for all sorts of reasons. They might want a new skill set, they might want a new geography, or a new technology. And sometimes they will go to buy those things without them being fully formed. You know, as long as there's a proven track record, i.e. in AI, in technology, or the fact that they're working with certain types of client, or there's an office in New York that's, you know, a startup that might suit a bigger business, they may well be interested in buying the business. But if you're serious about, and that those things may be much more opportunistic, you know, with the buyer perhaps coming to have an approach. But if you're serious about selling the business, you've probably got to spend really think about it 2 or 3 years out from selling, and get the business into the best shape possible. You know, what we do as a firm is we do a thing called a commercial review about 2 or 3 years out, and it gives a valuation, gives a strategy, and gives a number of things that the seller needs to do to get the business in absolutely the best shape for the buyer.
And what do you see in terms of the company? We've talked about the founders, but I think it's very easy sometimes to lean on the founders as the face of the organization, and as a buyer, you may or may not want to take the founders with you, but the company has to stand as a brand by itself, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It does. And I think in terms of the founders, I mean, the buyers do like that comfort of as I say, their worst fear is that the founder leaves on acquisition, and they're left with something they don't understand or can't control. But they are, you know, usually as time goes on, they're happy for the founder to leave. You know, they put their systems in place, they put their people into the business, and gradually they're much more comfortable about the founder leaving. So but you do need that second tier, really, that's the crux of the business. You don't very often get a founder putting in a new MD or something like that. You really ought to have somebody.
But there needs to be this brand maturity in the organization in terms of its online presence and use of social media.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right, and that's all about marketing, really. Say an agency needs to market itself as if it's its very best client. You know, it needs to treat its own brand like its best client's brand. And particularly in this day and age, where, say, you have all the algorithms and all the other things to keep your business. You know, trust doesn't come from just being a well-known founder in in the circuit. It's all about having trust online, which attracts business, and that's really important.
I've got a meeting on Friday with an organization which is a startup, and the founder's LinkedIn profile has nothing about the company
right
on their LinkedIn profile, and neither does their X or their Twitter.
Yeah, no, that's really important. And we would say to people, make sure your marketing collateral materials are really, strong before trying to sell, because it's interesting. I mean, when we, and I don't want to detract off what you just said, because I think that's important. I'm going to whiz back to that,
Yeah,
what you
there's
just
more.
said, Tim. Yeah, absolutely. So we can perhaps talk about that a bit more. But the one thing is very powerful in M&A terms is that when you send an anonymous one-pager to a potential buyer, and they've obviously read the one-pager and they say, that looks an interesting business, and they sign the NDA and they say, who is it? And if they recognize that name through somewhere and they look at your website and you've got an impressive website, that really gives a strong advantage in the sale game, as it were. Whereas if you haven't, they can't find your website, which is not unusual, or it's it happens. So all of those things, it's worth polishing. But equally, as you've just pointed out, it's so important as well to have your LinkedIn presence completely in line for all your people as well, and that's where your business is such an excellent business for doing that, really. So
yes, so I got the first I knew about this meeting was that I sent the person who's setting up the meeting my calendar link. So the first time I knew about the CEO was basically in the meeting. So I saw the email, so I took the email and checked out the website to see what they did. And then the next thing I did was I went to LinkedIn to find the individual, and I couldn't find them. And the reason for that was that I was searching for the company, and they're not connected to the company on their company page on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
They also don't have the name of the company anywhere on their LinkedIn profile, so there's no string to basically search for.
Yeah, no, that's right. And all the employees may have different LinkedIn profiles. And if you look at the company page, there's perhaps all stragglers in there that shouldn't be in there.
Well, there's this random in there that I get, which like is that what your business does? Or it's one of these, sign up with us and we'll send millions of emails and you'll be a zillionaire type person.
Yeah. No, all of that needs it needs care and attention ideally before the sale process. It's really important. And the thing is, I think if you prepare a business for sale, you're going to have a much better business anyway, even if you don't decide to sell it. I think that's the key to it all. Perhaps work with you on some of that marketing, the LinkedIn area. Work with us on doing a commercial review. They're often very powerful things that actually create a much better business for the founders anyway.
One of the things that you talked about when we did the preparation was about client domination and not having one client that you were totally reliant on for revenue. Is that something that is still important?
Yes, I think that is really important, and buyers still consider that very, very important. I would say tops really 30%. I mean, it's not impossible to sell a business that is very dominant. I mean, I've come across some agencies that have virtually, sort of 70 or 80% with one client. And the strange thing about our industry is even if you try and win other business, that client tends to go and get bigger and bigger. So you're always stuck with that 80%. And look, these companies are sellable. I mean, I came across an events business a while back, and they were very dominant with one client. But the events industry is so kind of specialist that you can almost understand that would be very sticky because the client had worked with them for many, many years. But yes, it is important. I mean, generally in marketing terms, I've also, on the corollary of that, I've known businesses that have, dominated, and then I think it was Martin Sorrell came along and offered that client. The agency was very dominant with one client. And Martin Sorrell came along and offered the client a big package, which really wiped out that client overnight. Which was despite him telling us that, oh, don't worry, they're in different regions, they're in different countries, there's different points of buyer contact. These disasters can happen. So that's why buyers can be very, very wary of that situation. And you'll be marked down on it in terms of value, but they're not impossible, as I say, not impossible to sell. You may well find that a buyer can add that to its portfolio, and the buyer will then only be down to 10% or whatever. So it's there's ways to get around these things.
David, thank you so much for coming on and talking about the ins and outs of buying and selling companies. Remind people where they can get hold of you.
Yes, LinkedIn, David Blois, as the name here, Blois. Website, www.m&aadvisory.com. Hopefully I'm pretty accessible, unlike some of the people we were talking about.
Yes. Well, I should think if people were looking for you and they couldn't find you, they weren't looking hard enough, rather than I think that's this other individual that I've got a call with on Friday. Yeah.
Yeah.
David, thank you so much for that. It's been really interesting and enlightening. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. A real pleasure to